welcome to the US of NA. I'm your host and chief optimist, John Eggleton. I'm going to be joined today by Dani Baranowski. Dani is the executive director of the Florida Hemp Beverage Coalition. She's also an entrepreneur in the cannabis space herself and someone who's very passionate about the industry, has been involved with it for many years. And I wanted to bring Dani on just to talk through all the things that are happening right now in hemp. So barring something changing between now and November, the so-called loophole in the 2018 Farm Bill that made THC derived from hemp federally legal is set to close. So obviously there's been a lot of activity to change that, to create more common sense regulations. And Dani is one of those people who's been very involved with that. She's also one of the people that I know who's just the most, I think, in tune with what's happening, has been in the rooms with legislators and has advocated for this space for quite some time. And I think is very aware of what some of the challenges are and has some ideas for what common sense regulation might look like going forward. So we hope maybe you'll learn a few things and enjoy this conversation. All right. Dani Baranowski is the executive director of the Florida Hemp Beverage Coalition. She's also the founder, CEO of Hospitality, a certification and training platform educating those serving THC beverages. So there's definitely a lot going on right now in the hemp space. So we're really thrilled to have someone of Dani's experience and point of view. So Dani, welcome to the US of NA.
Thanks for including me. I think the integration of THC is the future. It's already happening, and I'm so excited to talk about it and where it's going and where we want to grow together. Awesome. So yeah, we've been looking forward to this conversation too.
So I know you wear a few different hats. You're an entrepreneur, started a couple of companies, and you're on the advocacy side. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about your story. So, what brought you into this line of work? Certainly there's certainly probably more stable, career options out there right now than all the different things that are happening. Although maybe that's job security. I guess it can work both ways, but would love just to know your story a little bit and why this, means something to you personally.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking. I think it's important to know where people came from. So first and foremost, I'm a serial perpetual entrepreneur. My entire life, I've been looking at existing categories and seeing what could be improved or where could I go a little deeper on that. So for example, when my neighborhood, the gals had lemonade stands, I was like, I'd like to diversify here. So I created a pitch deck along with my little brother, because we were a duo, and we created a pitch deck, raised some funds for my parents to then get a snow cone machine. So it's always been on my horizons of what could I bring to the table that might be unique and different? And when I saw the cannabis industry unfolding in the early stages in the 2017, I thought, wow, I want a piece of that. And so I actually, on a bit more sensitive and a personal side, had been affected by failed drug policy. So when I was 18 years old, I was in college, I was in marching band at the University of Utah. I had never been in trouble in my life. And unfortunately, I got busted by a forest ranger, and this is in 2009, so early days. But got caught with cannabis. I had a little less than 1 gram, so a very small amount. But I ended up getting charged with 2 felonies, one for paraphernalia and one for possession of a controlled substance. And I made my way through the federal justice system, not necessarily understanding, why did this happen to me? But it built a lot of resilience in me and just an understanding of, there are far worse has happened to people that have done far less, but this didn't feel like I deserved it. And what the plea deal that I got was it was a privilege. And I'm a service above self type of a human. So that said, when I looked at the cannabis industry becoming legal adult use, I thought, well, I've got a little bit of street cred. So why shouldn't I be a part of building this new and nascent industry? So I jumped in. I immediately started my career as a salesperson, an international consumer educator. That was pretty amazing to travel the world talking about cannabis and teaching people about terpenes and just things that were even now are still not as well understood by the general public. And I just became obsessed with the concept that I am building the future. Like, we are building the foundation of something that's going to be even greater and bigger. And during that time, and this was in Las Vegas, Nevada, so I moved there year one, really built the scaffolding for, you know, how it's grown. And it's a hospitality tourism type of a town. And that's where I met other advocates and started doing volunteering. I shared my story with some of them, and they said, wow, that's really powerful. Like, we want to be talking about, it's important to let legislators and other people know your story so that we can prevent it from going forward. So part of my career is I just felt very empowered by the fact that because cannabis is a nascent industry, that we can create what's coming out of it, but we still have to educate. And that's something that anyone in the alcohol space or any other CPG space doesn't have to necessarily overcome. So
right.
I ended up, you know, building a trade organization, which became the largest in Nevada. We passed 4 monumental bills: cannabis consumption lounge legalization, cannabis DUI reform, allowing ex-offenders a pathway into the industry. That was certainly very important to me. And then 2.5xing the daily purchase and possession limit. So at its core, one of my North Stars is legislators don't know what they don't know. And we as business people and entrepreneurs have the opportunity to create legislation that is going to be beneficial, not just on the business and commerce side, but really for the masses. And like, what a powerful opportunity. So I made my way into hemp once I realized that the dispensaries, you know, selling in dispensaries is amazing and is fun, but one of my clients brought me into the beverage space as the technology for beverages started coming into existence. So this is like 4 or 5 years ago, right? They couldn't make the beverages taste good until then. And the second I got the chance to sell at a Total Wine, it just reinforced my passion, which was bringing the plant to the people. And that's how we're going to bring this mainstream. This is how we're going to get it to more people. And at its core, there's a lot of fighting, you know, marijuana versus hemp. And it's like, wait, aren't we all trying to bring more people to the plant? I think beverages are the great handshake and hug or hand, whatever you want to call it. So that's a bit on my background.
No, that's great. Well, first off, we love a good entrepreneur's journey. So and parents are those good early VCs, right? You know, they're our first funders, our first believers, and you know, then it all takes off from there. But you're right. I mean, this space is definitely, you know, I joked about it being not necessarily the most stable environments, and most things in their early days aren't. So, you know, there's rough waters out there, but there's a lot of entrepreneurial opportunity out there as well, as you well know. So love to hear all that. You know, I guess to start with, you know, the federal hemp provision, which I think more and more consumers are becoming a bit more familiar with, who may not have heard about all this when it first went down last year. But, you know, last November's Appropriations Act is set to take effect, I believe, November 12th. And it would redefine hemp by total THC and cap finished products at, I believe, a 0.4 milligrams per container, which, you know, would effectively, from estimates I've seen, and you probably have, you know, would wipe out, you know, north of 90% of what's on the shelves today around hemp. So would just love to hear, you know, from someone who's been involved directly with advocacy efforts, you know, to get some sort of, you know, meaningful and reasonable change enacted. You know, what are you hearing in terms of where things stand right now, and how realistic is it that something can get done before that November deadline?
You know, I am a pragmatic optimist. I generally just take everything with just a real sense of understanding, but it's like, this is a very unfortunate hurdle that we are facing. One thing that I know is that you can't regulate away consumer demand. And so when this unfortunate provision came to be, right, last year, they gave us 1 year to try and figure it out. And if I could say one thing, I think generally we can all agree, is that the federal government was also given 1 year to either build a framework or have these answers, and they do not move that fast.
Yeah.
So previously we were, existing under the 2018 Farm Bill, which was if it's above 0.3% THC, then it should be classified legally as marijuana or cannabis, and that should be moved through the dispensary channels. And if it is below 0.3%, regardless of the finished format, then it is federally considered legal. We can have interstate commerce. And that's where I think this entrepreneurial energy came from with the technology to make beverages taste good and all of these other people coming together. I mean, some folks would call it a loophole, but truly it was a threshold that was set. And people are living below it and excelling, and that's been amazing. So I'm super grateful for everyone that has invested a lot of money and a lot of work talking about, there's big groups on the beverage side like CABA, HBA. We've now got the retailers that have bought in Total Wine, Total Wine, ABC, Specs. They started a group called BAMCO, the Beverage Alcohol Merchants, right? And it's like, and then we just saw the National Restaurant Association coming in behind it. We saw a letter from the White House saying, we need to figure this out. And it's been amazing. I have, it's exciting to know that there's that much buy-in, but now we have to follow the legislative process. So if you remember School of Rock, it's like, right, like we have to set these bills have to be on the right vehicle, and then they have to get voted on, and then they make it to the president's desk.
I guess to build off of that a little bit, I have to imagine as you're in the room with lawmakers, there's probably just a huge education gap, right? And this isn't even necessarily to throw shade at our lawmakers. There's, plenty of ways that we could be critical of them, but, you can't be an expert on everything. And even for people who are following this space like I am, it can be difficult to keep up with what's going on. And, I don't even know if there's necessarily an understanding of kind of the hemp versus the recreational marijuana side and how those are, it's same plant, but there's maybe different factions and different priorities there. What are, as you're having conversations with lawmakers, what are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions that you're seeing, and what do you wish they better understood at this point?
So you already identified the first one, is that this is one plant, and I think that a lot of legislators, and I'm really glad that you mentioned, like, they can't be expected to know everything. A lot of folks like that, this is our world, this is our lane. We're like, how could you not think this is the most important thing? But when we're going back to I would just want to briefly go back to the provision where the ban was presented. It was like, we were talking about a very tense political environment where they said, we want to reopen the government, we want to fund TSA, pay our military, get SNAP benefits back in action. And unfortunately, there's just the way that politics works, that bill was put on there, and it was an either or. It's like, save our industry, which everyone here, we do feel so, it's very meaningful to us, but it's like, can we do either or? So that's where the federal advocates that we've been working with have been trying to define and build a better framework that legislators can stand behind and that can have broad support. Back to your question, like, I talk to legislators that have an entire range of understandings, and the two states where I've spent the most time speaking to legislators are Nevada and Florida. And I will say it's actually full of similar characters. So if I was going to broad stroke generalize, there's both sides, this is a nonpartisan issue. Legislators understand that their constituents want these products, that they are consuming it, that they are impactful to the economic impact. And so but then they also acknowledge, I don't know much about it. And I've been grateful to come into those rooms and say, well, I'd love to share more, and in two capacities. First, through some advocacy, offering my education and my personal, story, and then, also on my, looking at the on-premise THC side, hey, I have a solution for you to make sure that we have safe, responsible access. But your question was misconceptions. I think one of the hardest things we have to overcome is that there is these bad actors and they're generalizing the entire industry, And what they're seeing, what they're hearing is there's bad actors that are just causing a lot of harm. And these are folks that are, in fact, these bad actors are being all lumped into, they're calling them, gas station products. And that's an unfair classification of gas stations also. I want to make that clear. Convenience stores are age gating more adults in the United States every single day than any other category, full stop. And they're doing it well if we're looking at the actual numbers. So I really wish that, these legislators and some of the legislators have never even seen a hemp beverage. So it is so mysterious to them. And so I wish they understood that the low potency hemp beverage is not the same as a high potency gummy, a high potency vape, and that these low dose beverages can be controlled, they're sessionable, and that adults should be allowed to have access to these products that are arguably more safe than alcohol. And I've said this before on Fox News one time, but there's nothing more American than you being allowed to do whatever you want in your own home. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned, I think earlier, that beverages are sort of the handshake, where it's really taking cannabis into new places, which I certainly think is true. One answer for regulating hemp beverages that's, a pretty simple one and perhaps even inevitable would be just plugging it into the 3-tier distribution system that exists on the alcohol side. I think maybe one of the issues or wrinkles to that is, as an agricultural product, it does exist in other forms. Alcohol doesn't exist necessarily in, foods or other, gummies, things like that, whereas obviously hemp does. So there's different sides to it, but especially on the beverage space, it does feel like that's a logical way for it to go. And then you have, there are some people though on the other side who feel like if it's under the thumb of alcohol, that could be a problem for the industry. Obviously I think big alcohol has maybe not had warm feelings for cannabis. They've viewed it competitively and have done their best to keep it more criminalized. I know we could go deeper on that topic, but in a general sense, where do you stand, I guess, on 3-tier being the answer, and what might future infrastructure realistically look like?
I think that the 3-tier system is very helpful when we're looking at a useful infrastructure. Do I think it's perfect? No. I think even players in the 3-tier system would agree that it needs some work, it needs some updating. And I think that for us, and actually when I think about policy as a whole, and certainly with cannabis policy where it's like contentious and we have to overcome these things, progress is far better than prohibition. And we have to look at these things that way. It's a step forward, and that's movement, and that's what we're all looking for. So I think the things that 3-tier has done exceptionally well since the days of prohibition are, of course, the logistics. They have these relationships, they have chain of custody, they've got recall pathways, they understand restrictive regulatory environments, they understand taxation. And the interesting thing about the hemp beverage space, specifically the space I live in, is like, we want to be regulated. We are one of the few industries that's like, please give us the chance to regulate. We are self-governing right now, and we are, the best players that want to scale, that are doing well, are doing good business. And so, and we are playing with the 3-tier. I think that there are certain nuances that will have to be applied, and that this is where we can talk about the evolution of maybe what the integration of 3-tier happens, right? Like, we have completely, we've got different consumer education needs that retailers ought to be aware of, especially based on our scientific applications with different dosing and onset, and potentially different risks that we ought to mitigate in the same way that alcohol has dealt with over the years. I do think that we're doing similar things as the 3-tier system, right? 21 and up, we have clear serving limits. We're not trying to be attractive to children. We're holding retailers accountable. And I do believe that the 3-tier system is going to be a step forward. It can move the product safely, transparently, and responsibly. And I heard this at a conference the other day, is like, the car that gets us to where we're going, it might not be a Porsche, it might be a Toyota Camry, but at least we're going to be on the road.
Yeah. That's a definitely a good analogy. Progress is better than nothing at all. So especially with these deadlines that are looming. You mentioned, I think, the White House getting involved earlier. In fact, I think that's such a new development that's even happened since you and I first started talking about setting up this conversation. So that's just how quickly things are happening here. And we know that rescheduling of cannabis is underway. I know the previous administration had started that, but it didn't get done, and then kind of got put on hold. And now through executive order, that's finally been moving forward, which is certainly I think will be a very positive thing for the industry and on a lot of different fronts. Is there maybe an outcome to this where this divide between the hemp and the recreational camps could potentially unite, where maybe federal legalization could happen faster than maybe people imagine? I know, there's a thought that we're still a ways away from that happening, but sometimes when things get stuck, they eventually, there's a forced solution that might make things go a little bit faster. So I'm just curious to get your take if you see that as any kind of a near-term possibility.
I've been talking about and hoping for federal legalization since my career started. And we've always said, I think it's a couple years away. And I'm just going to maintain that stance. Again, of pragmatic optimism is like, I certainly hope, and every day and every executive order is more exciting. I personally would love for a descheduling, not a rescheduling. I think that's the best pathway forward. That's my personal stance. That said, federal legalization, that is moving the ball forward in a way that I'd love to see. The one thing that we can do specifically with hemp beverages and what has allowed us to thrive and succeed is we have access to banking and capital. And I feel for my friends who are still in the regulated space that have to overcome challenges, that have to pay more for certain services they can't get insured or what have you. So the banking would be, just very helpful. Interstate commerce. This is actually something that I think people have strong opinions about on if we are talking about legalizing federally cannabis. It's like, well, we've had these on the cannabis medical side or regulated side. It's like we have these markets who have become just these isolated state by state experts in their crafts. And it's like, if you're in Nevada, you're growing the best in Nevada, but what happens when now California cannabis is here? So I think that I think that two things. So absolutely federal legalization, that's in our future. That's going to happen. How are we going to prepare for it? How are we going to evolve? That would be helpful so long as we can have access to banking, and that we can make sure that all those other bureaucracy components are put in place so that the industry can thrive. And then I want to make sure that markets with state programs, they get the protection that they feel like they want. And with all things, the way that our democracy is set up is states have their sovereign rights to make sure that they can do what they choose. And I think that's something that sometimes really passionate cannabis advocates forget, is even if we did have federal legalization, it's still going to be up to our state. And then I want to put that responsibility back on business people, entrepreneurs, executives, advocates. It's like, okay, if that is the case, then it's up to us, again, to put out ballot measures to make sure that our legislators are educated and that we have the opportunity to make sure that they understand what an incredible impact that the plant can have on their state, on their bottom line. Let's be real.
Right. No, definitely. There's lots of different motivations. There's revenue and just personal interest as well. So there's a lot of different factors there. It's been interesting to us, I think, from where we sit. This podcast started a few years ago, and the Nation platform started about 3 years ago, really to focus on non-alcoholic beverages. Specifically NA beer in the beginning, and then kind of expanded out to other NA beverages, and then the THC and functional side once that really took off. And, you mentioned the handshake earlier. I think if you walk into any specialty beverage store, especially the hemp beverage aisle is also the non-alcoholic aisle. Those are always lumped together as sort of the alternatives. And it's been an interesting, I think, combination of those worlds. And it's not a perfect overlap. There are people that might be in one camp but not the other. But just curious to get your thoughts on how those two movements, you have the NA space, which has largely been fueled by kind of the, wellness and that sort of angle to things. And I think, some of the cannabis side as people have become more aware of the benefits of cannabis. And, we've obviously had medicinal marijuana that's been around for a while, and there's been a lot of really good studies on the effects of that, the anti-inflammatory properties, et cetera. How do you relate, I guess, those two movements joining together? And, how much do you worry about obviously the ban really, maybe breaking up that convergence?
I think that consumer behavior is evolving and shifting, right? We all know, we've heard this study in several ways, but 54% of Americans no longer feel like they are drinking alcohol on a regular basis. 50% of Gen Z doesn't want to drink alcohol, and the list goes on, and it could be a various amount of things. But I'm so excited that the NA category and both the THC side have been able to join together, and I've just loved the rapid innovation and adoption, because I don't love it when alcohol is villainized. And I think that one thing we can say, and I heard this from one of my colleagues the other day, he's like, it doesn't have to be an either or conversation, it's an either and. And we can be making beverages are bringing everyone together. Not everyone's smoking, but everyone's drinking, and so to have something for everyone, that is true hospitality. And that's what people are looking for. And I don't want to leave money on the table if I'm a restaurant operator or if I'm a server. Like, that's my goal, is to make everyone feel happy. And so when it comes to the THC beverages, I love that I can now sit in a restaurant with my friends and, today, I might have a day where it's like, okay, I'm not going to have alcohol today. I'm a competitive cyclist, so I'm training for a race. So I'm going to have a THC beverage, and I do want to drink something, and I still want to feel good. So I love that I can have those options. I think there's some NA companies doing amazing work, like Seedlip and some other dupes that just allow consumers to feel normalized based on whatever lifestyle decision they want to have. It's not just you either drink alcohol or you drink water. Now we just are expanding what the hospitality space can do. Now, when it comes to, are we going to lose the opportunity to sell THC mainstream? I've already seen a whole host of alternative plants and alternative things that you can replace it with. And I hope that we can I think THC is the best path forward. I think that, I said this earlier, and I just really believe it, is you can't regulate away consumer demand. Right. And the worst part is if you ban something, prohibition, right, then that strengthens the illicit market. Or alternatively, it's going to strengthen these alternatives. So it's like, either way, we need to find a way that it's clear that consumers want these beverages, they deserve them, and we have to make sure there's a sensible framework that can protect consumers, because that's what they always say it's about: consumer health and safety. Well, these are safe products generally, and how can we make sure that consumers have access to them instead of full prohibition, which we know from alcohol does not work. So why would we do that again?
Yeah, no, we have seen this movie before, so you're definitely right on that. And you're right. I think on the NA side and the overlap, it's been really nice to see what that looks like. And completely agree. I think there's that same debate on the NA side of the fence as well. That as far as villainizing alcohol, I mean, 92% of people who drink NA beverages also drink alcohol at other times. I don't know what that number is for hemp beverages. I have to imagine it's somewhere in the same space. So there's so much overlap, and especially Gen Z, they don't really see these barriers. It's just, what do they want to do that day? What do they want to feel? And maybe some days that's alcohol, and maybe some days it's not, and maybe some days it's THC or some other functional drink that they're interested in. So consumers are not seeing those walls walls that I think otherwise people are trying to put up. So it will be interesting. Well, before we let you go, we'd love just to hear, any predictions you want to make on, obviously as we sit here, we're, I guess, 4 months away from that potential hemp ban from going into effect. So any predictions on the next 6 months? And I'll broaden that to say, too, what's next for you? What are some things that you're working on, either at the coalition or your entrepreneurial efforts?
Yeah, thanks. The future is bright. The future is exciting. The future is terrifying, and there's a lot of work to be done. I'm living in both of these parallel lanes, and I'm hoping that there is an alternative that there's either two pathways, right? We can get an extension on the bill, on this ban rather, and then we can spend more time presenting to Congress a sensible framework that allows this industry to survive and thrive, or somehow we get the right framework ready to go and that we can get some buy-in. So I think that no matter what, hemp beverages will exist in 6 months. They will be legal. It is the road taken to get there. It might be a little bumpy. I hope that we don't have to have a small stop in being allowed to serve, but even if we did, I don't believe that would be forever. So I continue to follow different organizations. From my perspective on the coalition, we are ramping up our activities to make sure that no matter what happens federally, that our Florida legislators know that hemp beverages in Florida are a viable economic resource, that we believe in safety first, responsible age gating, testing, staying away from children, and that this industry wants to participate in a meaningful way to every part of the economy. And so we are right now gathering leaders to the coalition. If there is any companies that feel like they want to take part in a meaningful way in investing in Florida's future, we're building the framework. And I believe Florida's framework, because we haven't defined it as maybe some of the other ones just yet, that we have the opportunity to lead the country in what the best framework looks like. So I look forward to hearing from other stakeholders and making sure that they do that.
Yeah.
And then, I was going to say, just on my entrepreneurial side, closing that up, I have hedged all of my bets on hemp beverages. I moved from Las Vegas to Miami, and this category to me is the future, and I'm going to continue bringing any venues and restaurant operators, distributors, or brands that are selling into bars and restaurants. We have the opportunity to globally educate folks about cannabis, and then your brand gets to be sold once they can sell it safely, responsibly, and profitably. And so I'm grateful that I created a product that helps anyone that's ever even handled the drink, anyone handling your beverage. They should be able to speak to it to consumers in a way that's beautiful, and it doesn't turn them off from the category forever. So I would love to chat with anyone that is looking to build in that sector. I think it's the last frontier in hemp beverage evolution. On-premise came last, as opposed to alcohol. It was different directives. So I'm excited to build the future of on-premise with other folks.
Wow. Well, we really appreciate all the efforts that you're making on different fronts to really, I think educate and obviously on the advocacy side of things, which is so important right now. So we really appreciate, Dani, you sharing your perspective with us, and look forward to having you back on at some point to kind of talk through what comes next, whatever that might be.
We'll keep you updated on Florida, that's for sure.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.